Hello there, darlings. I do hope you're all well and most marvelous. My name is Samuel Zulli, and I am an ex-Scientologist. I grew up in Scientology, and I worked for the elite group of the C organization in Scientology for 7 years. I then left this group in 2012. I was still a Scientologist until about 2017, when I was 25 years old. And at that point, I sort of woke up from my whole brainwashing experience in Scientology, and I came to realize that Scientology was a cult. And in 2023 was the first time I publicly spoke about my experience in Scientology. And since March of 2024, I have my own YouTube channel where I have uploaded some videos and some interviews talking about Scientology, my experience in Scientology, trying to explain what Scientology is, and so on and so forth. And a few days ago, I made a video talking about growing up in Scientology, growing up as being a homosexual in Scientology, something that is very much frowned upon in Scientology, and how that caused me to be very depressed, combined with child neglect, child abuse, that later on I came to the point that I turned to self-harm, self-loathing, and even trying to take my own life. Now, I wanted to talk at this part, in the second part, of what have I done to not be as depressed anymore? What have I done to not wanting to take my own life anymore? And I wanted to also talk about, although I don't know how helpful it is, but I think it might be helpful to some people. I wanted to talk about the telltale signs of, now of course in particular me, my behavior, what I did shortly before I tried to take my own life. In case you have somebody in your life, a loved one, someone in the family, a friend, who you know is can be a danger to himself or herself, and so maybe you can use that, what I'm gonna tell you, to try to figure out whether they are going to do something, Now, I would like to say before I begin that I am not a trained professional. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist or anything like that. I'm just purely talking from my own experience in the hope this can help somebody. Now, I did think to myself for a moment after I had done the first part of the video, well, why am I talking about this again? I have talked about this part of my life several times in individual videos that I've done that are on my channel, but also having done interviews. And you see, the thing is that oftentimes when I talk to somebody else about Scientology and they didn't know I was a Scientologist or whatever, an ex-Scientologist, that I'm an ex-Scientologist and I was in Scientology and so on and so forth, one of the first things they usually say is, oh yes, that's where Tom Cruise is, they believe in aliens, right? And they sort of show it, or they present it in a way that makes me think they think it's just some sort of silly club with just weird, eccentric people in it. And don't get me wrong, I mean, Scientology is very goofy, there's no doubt about that, but it is so much more. It is so abusive, it is so neglectful, it is so, I would even go as far as say that the DNA of Scientology is generally quite evil, and if you were to follow Scientology to the letter, you will end up with a lot of and severe mental health problems. The longer you're in there, the worse it gets. And so I do want to, I do understand that people will always associate Scientology with Tom Cruise jumping on the couch, of course, and that Scientology is quite goofy, but I do want to bring to the forefront also that Scientology is very abusive. And there are many channels. In fact, I think pretty much all the channels that talk about Scientology, they do a very good job in showing that as well. But time and again, when I talk about Scientology, like in real life with an actual person rather than on YouTube, the reaction is more that, well, it's a silly club, it's a silly church, it's a silly religion, and so on and so forth. And they are not really aware of the abuse that is happening in Scientology. And so that is why I would say why I want to talk about this again and again, just to really highlight my own personal abusive and neglectful experience as a child in Scientology. So the first part of my video, I really go into details on that. So if you haven't watched it yet, I will put up a link so that you watch that first. And then this part will be about, what I've done to overcome that and the telltale signs, of somebody who wants to take their own life, specifically, obviously, talking about myself. Now, I'm going to start with that. So I'm now generally speaking, I'm quite a cheerful person. I'm quite optimistic. I sort of think to myself, when something happens, I'm like, oh well, never mind. Let's clean it up. Let's get on with it and whatever. But back when I was during the time where I really almost constantly thought about taking my own life, I was very much the opposite. I was very negative. And negative in the sense of somebody would say, oh, it's the weekend. Do you think it's going to be nice weather? What will you do? I would say, well, I don't think it's going to be nice. It's probably going to be raining, in that sort of way, in that sort of negative sort of way, rather than being optimistic. And, I would always be I would be the quiet kid. I'd be very quiet. I wouldn't say much. If somebody talked to me, I would be quite cheerful. I would engage in a conversation, but I would rarely actually start a conversation. Even if I would be invited somewhere to go and eat or to have a drink or whatever, I would just sit there. And if somebody were to ask me a question, I will answer. I will engage a little bit, but I wouldn't really get into it because I saw myself as a burden. I saw myself as a nuisance. And I thought to myself, the only reason why this friend or this group of friends invited me is because they felt sorry for me. It's not because they actually enjoyed my company or they appreciate my thoughts or whatever. And so, I mean, again, this is a very sort of pessimistic sort of way of thinking. And that's sort of generally my mood. At work, I would never chit-chat, ever. Even if I would have had the time to, I would be very focused. I would be very harsh as well with words and things like that. And what would happen when I would plan to then take my own life, and I would plan it out very exactly. I would say, okay, in 2 weeks on a Tuesday, I will do this, that, and the other. I will plan for it. And once the plan was set and I was sure, okay, everything is in order, that it can happen and it would happen successfully, I then became almost overly cheerful. I mean, it was really from night to day, completely different. I was almost a different person because I had almost like an inner peace. I knew my suffering was going to end in 2 weeks, in a week, in 10 days, or whatever it was going to be. And it made me happy, falsely happy, made me cheerful. It made me very content because I know I will not suffer anymore. Because on that day, it will end. And so I will become overly cheerful. Shockingly, people who comment on that would then comment, oh, wow, you're really happy, cheerful. What happened? Did you win in the lottery and so on and so forth? And combined with that, I would then start giving away possessions. I would give away things that are dear to me, that are important to me. If I ever had somebody, over at my place and somebody say, oh, that's pretty cool or that's nice, I would just then give that to them without even, thinking about it. And I've given away things because somebody else, pointed out they liked that, or I would give away things that I knew were important or precious, either because, they were maybe made out of precious metals, so they're maybe valuable in itself, or they were maybe valuable because it was art or some antique or whatever. And I would say a part of that, why I did that, is because I wanted to almost like, I think it's weird thinking about it, but I think I was trying to sort of almost leave a last good impression. So that once I'm gone, they will not say, oh yeah, he's the guy who never really said anything, didn't, was not very friendly or whatever, that they have a sort of a kind thought about me when I'm gone. It's a bit of a selfish sort of way of thinking, I suppose, but, quite honestly, I think that is part of that. But also another part is that I didn't want my family to get a hold of it. You see, because my family is all in Scientology. And if I were to pass away, they would get all of my things. In Switzerland, the law is quite clear that only up to maximum of 10% of your possessions, of your money, of whatever it is that you have, you can actually give away to somebody else. But the rest, if not even 100%, if you haven't written down anything specifically, will go to your family. Now, in my situation, I have siblings and I have parents that are still alive. So 50% of my belongings would go to my brother, my sister, and 50% would go to my father and mother. And because they are all involved in Scientology, I knew they would then have obviously my money, my money on my bank accounts, as well as my art and whatever it is that I have they could sell and then use for Scientology. And I didn't want that to happen really. So I would then give away things that I had. And yeah, that was something I did. So I gave away lots of things that were valuable, that were precious to me. I would just give them away. So I do hope this has been interesting and informative, and I hope this can actually help somebody out there. Now, another point I would like to talk about, of course, is what have I done to cope with depression, with self-harm, self-loathing, and all of that. One of the silly things I have done and am doing, and sometimes I have to remind myself to doing it because sometimes I don't do it properly, is instead of saying, like when I made a mistake, to say, oh, you're so stupid, or whatever, because mistakes do happen. And you see, in Scientology, you are trained to be a perfectionist. You can never make mistakes. Mistakes are not allowed. They are not forgiven, and they are, in many cases, even punished. A simple mistake. So you cannot make mistakes. So this sort of thing is very much pushed and trained to not make mistakes. And so when you make mistakes, it's like the end of the world, even though it might be something very small and silly. And so I used to be very harsh and severe with myself. And so now what I do instead is I just say, oh, aren't I the smartest person in the room? Or I say, oh, silly me. Things like that to lighten the situation rather than just verbally abusing myself, really. Because if you think about it, and this is the truth in my case, that if somebody else at work did exactly the same mistake and I would see it, I wouldn't think of them as being stupid. I wouldn't think of them as being whatever, I wouldn't think that. I would just think, oh, it's just a mistake. I would even say maybe an encouraging word. I would say, oh, don't worry about it. This has happened to me as well, or whatever. So why would I not treat myself that way, right? So, think about it in a rational way. It doesn't make any sense. And so that's something I started doing, which certainly has helped. Then another things I did, this I shout out to Marshall. He gave me this advice, which when I heard, I thought was a bit silly, but I tried it out and it really helped, which basically is about counting your blessing, being grateful for what you have. And what he told me to do is you take a paper, or in my case, I took a little booklet, and you just write down all the things that you have and that you're grateful about. And very obvious things as well, that you can write, that you can read, that I can see. Yes, of course, I have glasses, but I can afford glasses. I can afford something to help me read, right? I have 2 arms, I've got 10 fingers. Things like that, things that seem very obvious and we don't really question or think about really. And write these things down. So he said on the first day, just write everything down you can think of. And then from that point onwards, every day, write down 3, 4 things additionally to that. And on the days where you cannot think of anything, you just go through the list again. Just read again what you have written. And I've done this for a few weeks, and the list has gotten so big that it just sort of came, just one day, it just sort of hit me of how well I'm doing now. Now, the point of the exercise is not to compare yourself to other people, because of course, there are always going to be people who have it way worse than you, and there are always going to be people who have it way better than you. But what I have done, which I think is much healthier, is compare myself to my past self. So how was I 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, compared to now? Like, how am I doing now compared to then? And I mean, these are, mountains apart of how I'm doing. And that sort of attitude, that sort of view, comparing yourself, to your past self, rather than comparing yourself to other people, because I don't think that is a very helpful way, because we all are different. We all are different. We have all different experiences. For one person, this experience is trauma. For other people, it isn't trauma, because they've had way worse trauma. And so when something light happens to them, it isn't trauma, but this light thing could be for me trauma, you see. So comparing yourself to other people, I don't think that's very healthy or very helpful, but comparing yourself, to your past self, that certainly helps. And this exercise seems silly. I know. That's what I thought. But I thought to myself, well, why not? Just do it. And it really helped me. That is something I really recommend to anybody who is struggling with depression, with self-loathing, self-harm, or whatever. That is something that really has helped me, and I really, really tried doing that. Another thing, a classic: go out and take a walk. I mean, we've heard this so many times, and I'm sure everybody who has depression is sort of rolling their eyes. Yeah, go out and take a walk. I've heard that before, but it really helps. I mean, it helps me go out into nature, and I would say that is almost like a branch of the other exercise of appreciating what you have, appreciating the beauty of the world. I mean, we live on such a beautiful planet. Imagine we would live on Saturn. I think that would suck. Yeah, just think about it. Anyway, but going out, either appreciating nature, Mother Nature, but also going out to a museum, going out to an art gallery, and seeing the beauty of humanity, the beauty that humankind has created. My town is a very old town. We have buildings that are 700, 800, 900 years old. Our cathedral is over 1,000 years old. I mean, these beautiful things that have persisted for so many generations and created by humanity. I mean, these are beautiful things. And going there and seeing these things, that's something that certainly has, cheered me up and sort of appreciate my surroundings and, the things that I have. So I would say it's almost like a second part of the first part. And yes, I have heard that many times before. I actually went out and consciously did it. But maybe somebody, you listening now, you've heard it now 37 times. And now on the 38th time that you hear it, you say, you know what? Samuel said that, I'm going to try it out. And maybe after you've tried it out, you will actually realize it actually does help. And, and maybe you need to hear it 5 other times from other people until you try it out and it works. And maybe you try it out, it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. Just because something works now for me, the same with the writing exercise, that it worked for me, it doesn't mean it will work for other people. This is another thing that is part of Scientology. In Scientology, the belief system is that Scientology works 100% of the time if you apply it 100% correctly, which basically means if you do Scientology, it doesn't work, or it doesn't seemingly work, you don't feel better, in fact, you may even feel worse, it's because you didn't do it correctly. That is the only reason. It's not because, all right, fair enough, didn't work for you, it might work for other people, let's try something else out. No, it will work 100% of the time if you do it 100% correctly, meaning if it doesn't work, you didn't do it correctly. And so, one does fall into the pattern of trying something out that has helped somebody else, didn't help for me, so there's something so wrong with me because it didn't work, right? That's the wrong attitude. We're not a dough and using a cookie cutter, trying to use the same cookie cutter and it will work every single time. It's just that's not how we are. And so something that works for me might not work for you, but that doesn't mean there is something wrong with you, or you're so beyond that you cannot be helped by that exercise. It just means, all right, fair enough, try something else out. No problem. I mean, there are many different things you can do. I'm just talking about the things that have helped me, that hopefully might help somebody else. So, yeah, so these are the sort of things I have done that have certainly helped me. Another part, of course, is having friends, having people you can confide in and really be honest about, be vulnerable, and really say, when they ask, how are you doing, you can be honest with them, say, you know what, I've had a pretty shitty day today, actually, and talk to them about it. And I have found that just talking to them about certain things, even if maybe, not with the expectation they'll give you advice, because they might not even know what to say necessarily, but just instead of the thoughts bouncing around in your head, just saying them out loud, having another person hearing them and them just saying, okay, oh wow, I understand, or whatever, that sometimes has helped me to sort of figure out a solution, or sort of help me put it into perspective and realize it's actually not such a big deal. It's actually not that severe. It's not something to be that you really have to worry about right now or anything like that. And I mean, that's something that has helped me to really talk about it with somebody else in front of you, you know. Obviously, I am also doing it now. I mean, right now I'm in my apartment talking to myself, really, but you guys are responding. You guys are writing comments, you're writing questions, and sometimes you will comment or you'll ask a question that I never even thought about, and I'm like, oh wow, that's a new way of looking at that. Interesting. And of course, your very kind words, which I really appreciate, and your encouragement, and yeah, so that sort of thing certainly also helps. So, my darlings, I do hope that this little chat was interesting, informative, possibly even helpful to you. Please be a darling and hit the subscribe button if you like my style of talking about my experience, talking about Scientology. I have many other videos where I talk about other aspects of my story in Scientology, or where I talk about certain things in Scientology, trying to explain them, because Scientology is a rather complicated subject. Do hit the like button if you liked it. Down in the comment section, do write comments, ask questions. I also have an email address, which is down in the description. It's thespchef@gmail.com. And to end off this a little bit depressing sort of chat, this video, I will tell a little joke that I heard a few months back, and I thought was quite amusing. So 3 nuns get into a terrible accident, and unfortunately the little darlings, they pass away, and they go up to heaven, and they are in front of Saint Peter and the pearly gates of heaven, of course. And Peter tells them, right, sisters, you've lived a very good life. You deserve, of course, your time in heaven, but because you were sisters, you have to each answer a question. And the sisters sort of mumble to themselves, what? They didn't tell us about this, and nothing of that was written in the Bible. Ridiculous. And St. Peter says, oh, don't worry, darlings, they're quite easy questions. So the first nun steps up, and Peter asks, okay, well, what is the name of the first woman on earth? And she grins very broadly and says, oh, well, that's easy. That's Eve. And Peter says, oh, yes, excellent. Well done, well done. And he opens the gates, and she goes through. And then the second one steps up, and he asks, where did the first woman on earth live? And she smiles very broadly and says, oh, that's easy, in the Garden of Eden. And St. Peter opens the gates again, and then she can go in. And then the third nun steps up, and St. Peter says, well, now, you were Mother Superior, so I have to give you a question that's a little bit more difficult, but I'm sure you'll get it. And so he asked the question, what was the first thing that Eve said to Adam? And the nun, she's thinking, and she's thinking. And after a few minutes, she said, oh, that's a hard one. And St. Peter says, that's right, please proceed into heaven. And with this naughty little joke, I do hope you have a marvelous and most excellent day, and I shall see you very soon again. Goodbye.